Hello and welcome to the very first video of multiple videos that we're going to be doing in order to clearly understand the relationship between two entities based on one-to-many. We're going to be using, for example, state and cities. The state is going to, of course, be the one in the relationship, and the city is going to be the many. Meaning, for every state, we're going to have multiple cities that are going to fall within that state. We're assuming strictly that every city is going to be mentioned is going to belong to one state. There is no way you could have actually a city in two states. So clearly, we have to differentiate the type of the relationship from other type of relationship like one-to-one and many-to-many. So one-to-many is going to be and easy to establish, but we need to follow all sorts of requirements in order to make sure that the relationship is going to be established with no problem. This is this discussion, assuming that we going to think the right way about building a database. We're going to separate completely the city from the state, but eventually we're going to be linking them in a relationship. And only based on that relationship, they can see each other. There is no way to think about, no need, or actually we emphasize this again and again, there is no need to think about the state when you're thinking about the city. Don't think about the city when you're thinking about the state. In order to illustrate this in this example, we're going to have 3 states and multiple cities. We already thought about the attributes or the field names or the characteristics that we need to know about every city and the characteristics that we need to know about every state. So let's go ahead and start with the mother. I call it the mother because there is no way you could really have a city unless you have a state. So the state is the mother of the city, and the city is going to be acting as the child. So the mother should exist before the child can exist in the real world. If we think about it this way, it will minimize so much of the anomalies that we will be discussing in future videos and how to eliminate them. And that happens usually if a person did design a database that is really fragile to start with. They didn't think about the relationship. They brought it from a spreadsheet. They want to convert it into a solid, organized relational database. So those are coming in the future, but now we're thinking about it the right way from the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and start building the database. I'm using Microsoft Access 2016 to illustrate this. The concept doesn't really differ from this application to any other or environments. If you move to MySQL or any sort of relational database, it's going to be identical. The only thing is so good about Access for beginner or at the beginning, it's really a graphical user interface, and there's a lot of things that can be done by design instead of by actually writing SQL, the structured query language, that we will also be learning about it in future videos. So let's go ahead and start creating the database. The database is not like spreadsheet, not like Microsoft Word document. It's a container. It's a system that has multiple objects that are going to be within the database itself. I'll rather use convention that is going to be consistent in naming my object. For example, when I name my database, I start with the prefix DB, and I'm going to use also the camel casing to avoid having a space in the names of my object. So I'm going to go ahead and say state. And I'm going to say in cities, and I'm going to make that city plural because for every state there will be multiple cities. That's a convention, or thinking about it a little bit more intelligently. So the name would actually convey some meaning. And as you notice here, when we do the database in Access, we creating it. We're not saving it as, but the newer version of Access does allow you to save it as if you want to change the name of it, but always know where you want to put it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into my, I'm going to put it in this time into my documents, but I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it database database class. So I know that it's going to be all the things I'm going to put right here. And open this, and I say okay. The name is there. Create, and here we go. It's going to go to that right folder. The very first thing that we're going to do when we get to inside, we have to create, of course, the table. The table is the state, and this is the environments. There are always multiple views for within Access. The very first thing that we should do is to change the view to the design. So look here, we have the datasheet view, which can allow us to see the actual data when we enter it, and the design view, which is the actual view that will allow me to think about what I need to include in the table, in this case, table state. So I'm going to actually also use the same convention that I used before, and I'm going to call the table starting with the 3 letters TBL with capital T S T E, which is table state, using the Hungarian notation, which is the prefix TBL, and camel casing, which is the capitalization of the first letter of every word, in order to make it easier on my eyes when I read it, because I advise you over and over not to have a space in the name of your object, even though Access does allow you to do this. But in case you want to move your database from a smaller environment like Access to a bigger one like MySQL, you don't have to really worry about the spaces later. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now, as you notice, Access gave me the design, and also freely gave me a primary key. It's called ID and auto number. As we all agreed before that we should have our own primary key. And first of all, I'm going to go ahead and undo the primary key. I don't need the ID here. I'm going to go ahead and say state abbreviation. Or let's start with state name, and this is going to be the data type of it is going to be short text, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to change this to let's say there's no more bigger state than 20, let's say 30, even though I'm wasting some characters here and there. And we have state abbreviation, and that's still going to be a text short, and I'm going to be limit that to 2. And in the input mask, I'm going to actually force those 2 letters for the state abbreviation to be a capital. So I'm going to say greater than, and I know greater than, it's going to be greater than, we could go ahead and say L, and another greater than L for a character that will be inserted when I do put actually. Let's go ahead and try it first. I'm going to go ahead and change the view, and I'm going to change it to the datasheet view. It says you must save it before we do anything. Let's say started with Texas, and when I put here TX at lowercase, immediately made it a capital. So the input mask is going to be very helpful for us in the future. Of course, this is quick demonstration. I need to do more with the design. So I'm going to go ahead and, before I move any forward with this, I need to choose the primary key based on the fact that state name and state abbreviation both are legitimate. They are unique. No 2 state have the same name. Obviously, there is no 2 state have the same abbreviation. So both of them are going to be acting as a candidate key. So I would go for the state abbreviation as the better choice because it's minimal meaning lower number of characters, and there is no room really to make as many mistakes as you would do with the state name. I invite you to spell Massachusetts or Mississippi in order to realize how beneficial it is to decide on the state abbreviation as the primary key. So once we decided on the primary key, and I'm going to go ahead and put a primary key option here to add it to the state abbreviation. We're going to continue with this. I'm going to say here population, and we're going to go ahead and change that to a number. and I'm going to leave it as a long integer. And we're going to go ahead and say I'm going to make it smaller list of attributes or field names, as we call them in Access. I'm going to go ahead and say the size of the state, and it's going to be text, but I'm going to limit it to 10. But I'm going to be using now the Lookup Wizard to give me a definite or only a few number of options instead of giving the chance to somebody to do all sort of entries, which really help me later when I do the query to select a few keywords instead of not knowing what possibly the user later is going to be entering for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say I wanted to enter this because I don't have anything really in the database to pull from another table that happens in the future. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, I want to enter that. And actually, sorry, I will type in my list, and I'm going to go ahead and say large or very large state, like Texas, large, medium, and I'm going to go ahead and say small state. And we're going to say next, and notice I'm going to limit this to the list so people are not able to enter anything other than what I chose for them. Sometimes you want to really not limit it to the list. And of course, we're going to go ahead and say finish. You will see the impact of what I just did on when I do actually enter the data. Another thing that I would like to add to the state, you know, the region where it is actually the region. And I'm going to go ahead and also do similar to the Lookup Wizard. And I'm going to go ahead and type it. I'm going to type it, not pull it from somewhere. And we're going to do here Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and we're going to say here Northwest and Southwest. And that would be enough for me for the state. I'm not going to get like the flower and the bird. We could do that if we are into really an actual real building for a database. One thing I need to make sure, because I did advise you repeatedly not to have a space in the name of the field name. There is an option for us to go ahead and the caption, which is later we will learn how to do that in SQL. I'm going to go ahead and say state name with the space because that's much easier to read it when I do the report. And also I'm going to go ahead and say state abbreviation. Population, I don't need to really write it because if you have the right name as the field name or the way you want it to display, there's no need to put it in the caption because it does default to it. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and agree only on those 5. Of course, we could go a lot more than this, but the idea is to really explain the relationship. I'm going to change the view, as you notice, to the data sheet of view, so I could enter 2 states. And it says you must save it. You need to understand that Access, listen to me very carefully, Access does save the data automatically. Not like spreadsheets where you have to constantly save it. But if you do change any sort of design, the design must be changed in order to be kept. So be careful. You could spend hours on designing a report or designing a query, and you don't save the changes, it's all going to go to nothing. Of course, the data automatically, once you enter it, it's going to be saved. So make sure that you understand this. Let's go ahead and put 28 million people for Texas. I hope I don't see very well here. I'm counting the zeros. There is one more zero. And the size, because we put that in the Lookup Wizard, it's very large, and it is Midwest, if I'm correct. And this is entered my state, Texas. We're going to go ahead and do my beloved state, Florida, and that's going to be FL. And I think it's 21 million. I might be very wrong, and this is large, and it's actually Southeast. So I'm going to stick with this too, and I'm going to stop right here because we already exceed the 10-minute limit for this video. But it's good to finish the thoughts. And in the next videos, I'm going to go ahead and build that city. Then I'm going to establish the relationship and also move along to create forms, queries, and of course reports. So be patient with me, and we're going to stop right here. And this is going to be our very first video in this series of videos. Thank you so much for your patience, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.